Breaking news that nobody saw coming. Alex Eala just shattered Rafael Nadal's carefully crafted narrative, live, unfiltered, and unapologetic on national television. The tennis world expected gratitude, humility, maybe even tears. Instead, they got truth. A truth so raw it left commentators speechless and fans divided down the middle. What really happened between the Filipino rising star and the king of clay's so-called gift to her career? And why did she choose this moment to speak out? When Alex Eala stepped through the gates of the Rafa Nadal Academy in Mallorca at just 14 years old, the world saw it as a fairy tale. Here was a young girl from the Philippines, a country not known for producing tennis champions, receiving what everyone called the opportunity of a lifetime. Rafael Nadal himself had extended the invitation. The media ate it up. Headlines painted it as pure generosity, a legend giving back, nurturing the next generation, opening doors that would otherwise remain locked for someone like Eala. The narrative was perfect. Too perfect. Nadal's team framed it as mentorship, as charity, as something almost sacred. They released photos of Eala training on the same courts where Nadal had honed his own craft. They shared videos of her receiving advice from the Academy's coaches, all under the watchful eye of the Nadal brand. The optics were flawless. A humble champion helping a hungry underdog. The kind of story that makes you believe in the goodness of sports. But narratives like that always have another side. They always do. Because behind every perfectly curated Instagram post and every glowing press release, there's a reality that doesn't always fit the script. For Alex Eala, that reality was complicated. It was pressure-packed, and it was something she carried in silence for years. The Academy wasn't free, let's be clear about that. While the media loved to call it a gift, Eala's family was paying tuition. She was a student athlete in a high-performance program, not a charity case. But the narrative persisted. Every time she won a match, commentators credited Nadal. Every time she lost, they asked if she was living up to the investment. It was never just about her talent. It was always tied to him, to his academy, to his name. And that weight, that constant connection to someone else's legacy, became heavier with every passing year. Eala worked harder than most people will ever understand. She trained through injuries. She competed in junior tournaments across Europe while her peers back home were living normal teenage lives. She sacrificed friendships, family time, and the simple joys of adolescence, all in pursuit of a dream that everyone kept telling her was only possible because of Rafael Nadal. But was it really? Or was she the one doing the work all along? The Academy gave her access, sure. World-class facilities, top-tier coaching, exposure to elite competition. But access isn't the same as achievement. Eala was the one stepping onto the court. She was the one grinding through 5-set matches in the burning Spanish sun. She was the one handling the pressure of representing an entire nation every time she competed. Nadal's name opened doors, but Eala was the one who had to walk through them and prove she belonged. And for years, she played the part. She smiled in interviews. She expressed gratitude when asked about the Academy. She said all the right things because that's what young athletes are taught to do. You don't bite the hand that feeds you. You don't question the narrative when it's working in your favor, even if it doesn't tell the whole truth. But gratitude and truth aren't always the same thing. And eventually, the truth has a way of demanding to be heard. But what happens when the weight of that narrative becomes too much to carry? Success came, but it didn't come easy. Alex Eala started winning. Junior Grand Slam titles, ITF circuit victories. Her ranking climbed. Her name started appearing in conversations about the future of women's tennis. The Philippines celebrated her as a national hero. She was breaking barriers, making history, becoming the player everyone hoped she would be. On paper, everything was going according to plan. But behind the scenes, something was shifting. Those who followed Eala closely started noticing subtle changes in her interviews. The enthusiasm was still there, but so was something else. A weariness, a guardedness. When asked about the Academy, her answers became shorter, more measured. She stopped elaborating. She stopped painting the fairy tale picture that everyone wanted to hear. And in the world of professional sports, where media training is everything, that kind of shift doesn't happen by accident. Eala was growing up, and with that growth came perspective. She began to see how her story was being used, how every article about her seemed to mention Nadal before mentioning her own achievements, how sponsors were more interested in the Nadal connection than in her actual game, how fans would approach her at tournaments not to talk about her forehand or her mental toughness, but to ask what it was like to train where Rafa trained. She was becoming a footnote in someone else's legacy instead of writing her own. The pressure intensified when she turned pro. Junior success doesn't always translate to the main tour, and Eala knew that better than anyone. She faced older, stronger, more experienced opponents. She dealt with injuries. She struggled with consistency. And every time she lost, the whispers started. Maybe the academy wasn't enough. Maybe she wasn't as talented as people thought. Maybe she was just another prospect who couldn't make the leap. The criticism cut deep, but what hurt more was the realization that her identity as a player had been tied to someone else from the very beginning. She started spending less time in Mallorca. She trained in other locations. She worked with different coaches. She began building a team that focused on her needs, her goals, her development, not on maintaining the narrative that had been constructed around her. It was a quiet rebellion at first. Nothing dramatic, nothing that would make headlines, just a young woman trying to take control of her own career and her own story. But the tennis world doesn't let go of its narratives easily. Every time Eala was interviewed, the questions always circled back to Nadal. Every time she achieved something, the credit was shared with the academy. It was as if she couldn't exist independently, as if her worth as a player was permanently linked to that one decision her family made when she was 14 years old. And that realization, that understanding that she might never escape the shadow of that connection, started to eat away at her. Her parents saw it, her coaches saw it, the people closest to her knew that something needed to change. But what could she do? Publicly denounce the academy? Trash talk Nadal? That would have been career suicide. It would have made her look ungrateful, bitter, immature. So she stayed silent. She kept grinding, she kept winning when she could, and learning from losses when she couldn't. But the frustration was building, and frustration like that doesn't just disappear. It waits for the right moment to be released. That moment came on live television, and nobody was ready for it. The interview was supposed to be routine, a post-tournament sit-down with a major sports network following Eala's deep run at a WTA 250 event. She had played well, reached the semifinals, pushed a top 20 opponent to 3 sets. It was the kind of performance that deserved recognition. The kind of performance that showed she was growing, evolving, becoming a legitimate threat on the professional circuit. The interviewer was friendly, the setting was relaxed, and everything seemed perfectly normal. Until it wasn't. The interviewer, following what must have seemed like a safe, obvious question, asked Eala to reflect on her journey, to talk about how grateful she must be for the opportunities she'd been given. And then came the line that changed everything. Rafael Nadal really gave you a second home at his academy, didn't he? How much of your success do you owe to that gift? There was a pause. A beat of silence that lasted just a fraction too long. Anyone watching closely could see the shift in Eala's expression. The smile didn't disappear, but it changed. It became something else, something harder, something real. And when she spoke, her voice was calm, steady, and completely unfiltered. With all due respect, it wasn't a gift, she said. My family paid for me to be there. I earned my place through my results. The academy is a business, and I was a client, a hard-working one. I appreciate the training, the facilities, the experience, but calling it a gift erases the sacrifices my family made and the work I put in every single day. The interviewer's face went blank. You could almost see the panic in the control room. This wasn't the script. This wasn't the heartwarming story they had planned to air. Eala continued, and with every word she dismantled the narrative that had been built around her for years. People act like I should be forever grateful, like I owe my entire career to one decision when I was 14. But I've been the one on the court. I've been the one dealing with injuries, pressure, expectations. I've been the one representing my country. Yes, the academy helped, but so did my parents, my coaches, my team, my own determination. I'm tired of my story being told like I was rescued. I wasn't rescued. I worked for everything I have. The silence that followed was deafening. The interviewer tried to recover, stumbling through a follow-up question, but the damage, or, depending on your perspective, the liberation, was already done. Eala had said what she needed to say. She had reclaimed her narrative, and within hours, the clip was everywhere. The internet was about to explode, and there was no going back. Social media moved at lightning speed. The clip of Eala's response went viral before the interview had even finished airing. Twitter erupted, Instagram flooded with reactions. TikTok creators dissected every word, every facial expression, every pause. The tennis world was split down the middle, and the battle lines were drawn immediately. On one side, Eala's defenders came out in force. Young athletes, women in sports, people from underrepresented countries, they saw themselves in her words. They understood the frustration of having your achievements credited to someone else. They knew what it felt like to be painted as a charity case when you had worked and sacrificed just as much as anyone else. The hashtag Team Eala trended for days. Supporters praised her courage, her honesty, her refusal to play along with a narrative that diminished her own effort. Finally, someone said it, one viral tweet read. These academies aren't charities, they're businesses. Stop acting like these kids should be grateful for the privilege of paying tuition. Another comment that gained massive traction came from a former junior player. I trained at an elite academy too. My parents went into debt, I worked my ass off, but every article about me mentioned the academy like I was a pet project. Eala is speaking for so many of us. But the backlash was just as fierce. Nadal's fanbase is massive, loyal, and protective. They saw Eala's comments as disrespectful, ungrateful, and strategically timed to generate attention. They argued that without the Academy's reputation and resources, she never would have had the platform she has today. They pointed to Nadal's humility, his charitable work, his dedication to growing the sport, and they couldn't understand why Eala would publicly undermine him. She would be nobody without that academy, one comment read. This is pure disrespect to a legend who helped her. Ungrateful, another said. Nadal didn't have to give her a spot. She should be thanking him, not tearing him down. Sports analysts jumped into the fray. Some defended Eala's right to tell her own story. Others accused her of being naive, of burning bridges she might need later in her career. Retired players weighed in. Coaches offered their takes. Agents whispered behind closed doors about whether this would hurt her marketability. The story had become bigger than tennis. It had become a conversation about power, privilege, gratitude, and the cost of speaking your truth in a world that prefers silence. Meanwhile, Nadal's camp stayed quiet. No official statement, no social media response, just silence. And that silence, intentional or not, only fueled the fire. People speculated. Was Nadal hurt, angry, indifferent? Did he even care? Or was this exactly what his team wanted, to let Eala take the heat while they maintained the moral high ground by refusing to engage? But here's the thing. What if everyone missed the point entirely? Lost in the noise, buried beneath the hot takes and the viral clips and the endless arguments, was the actual substance of what Alex Eala said. Because if you go back and listen to her words without the bias, without the preconceived narratives, you realize she never attacked Rafael Nadal. She never called him a bad person. She never said the academy was terrible or that she regretted her time there. What she did was clarify. She drew a line between gratitude and ownership. Eala's point was simple. Paying for a service doesn't make that service a gift. Training at an elite academy doesn't erase the work required to succeed there. And having access to resources doesn't mean you didn't earn your achievements. She wasn't diminishing Nadal's contribution to tennis. She was insisting that her contribution to her own career be recognized equally. This distinction matters. In sports, especially for young athletes from smaller countries or less wealthy backgrounds, there's a persistent narrative that they should be endlessly grateful for opportunities that athletes from traditional tennis powerhouses take for granted. An American or European player training at a top academy is seen as normal, expected. But when someone from the Philippines does it, suddenly it's framed as charity, as luck, as something they should never forget. Eala was pushing back against that double standard. She was saying, I belong here, not because someone gave me a chance, but because I earned it. And that message, when you strip away all the drama and controversy, is empowering. It's necessary. It's the kind of thing that needed to be said, even if it made people uncomfortable. Some journalists who revisited the interview started to see it differently. They pointed out that Ayla's tone wasn't angry or bitter, it was matter of fact. She wasn't lashing out, she was correcting the record. They noted that she specifically said she appreciated the academy, the training, the experience. She just refused to let that appreciation be twisted into a debt she could never repay. A few former players came forward with their own stories. They talked about the pressure of constantly being asked to thank the people who made their careers possible, even when those people were being paid for their services. They discussed how exhausting it is to have every success attributed to someone else, while every failure is yours alone. They validated what Ayla was saying because they had lived it too. But perhaps the most insightful take came from a sports psychologist who studies athlete development. In an article that gained significant attention, she explained how narratives of rescue and gift-giving can create unhealthy power dynamics. They can make young athletes feel indebted, less confident, and unable to advocate for themselves. They can stunt emotional growth and independence, and they can prevent athletes from fully owning their achievements, which is crucial for long-term mental health and performance. Ayla wasn't being ungrateful, she was being healthy. She was establishing boundaries. She was claiming her own story. And maybe, just maybe, that's exactly what the next generation of athletes needs to see. So where does this leave us, and what does it mean for the future?
The dust hasn't fully settled yet, and it probably won't for a long time. Alex Eala's live TV moment will be debated for years. Some will always see it as a misstep, an unnecessary controversy that damaged her reputation. Others will view it as a watershed moment, a young athlete standing up for herself in a system that too often demands silence and compliance. But here's what's undeniable. The conversation has changed. Because of Eala's willingness to speak honestly, people are asking harder questions about how we talk about young athletes, about how we frame mentorship and opportunity, about who gets credit when success happens and who gets blamed when it doesn't. These are uncomfortable questions, but they're important ones. For Nadal, this doesn't have to be a negative. In fact, if he chooses to engage thoughtfully, it could be an opportunity to evolve the conversation around his academy. He could acknowledge that yes, it's a business, but also a place committed to developing talent. He could celebrate Eala's independence rather than being offended by it. He could model what it looks like when a mentor celebrates a student who no longer needs them. That would be truly legendary. For Eala, the path forward is uncertain. This moment of honesty might cost her some sponsorships. It might make some tournament directors uncomfortable. It might follow her for the rest of her career. But it also might inspire a generation of young athletes to tell their own stories, to refuse narratives that don't serve them, to demand recognition for the work they put in. And that legacy, that cultural shift, might matter more than any trophy she'll ever win. The bigger question remains, what do we owe the people who help us, and what do they owe us in return? There's no easy answer. Gratitude is important. Acknowledging support is important. But so is autonomy, so is self-respect, so is the right to define your own journey without being forever tethered to someone else's generosity, real or perceived. Maybe the truth is that both things can be true at once. You can appreciate the doors that were opened for you while still insisting that you're the one who walked through them. You can be grateful for resources while refusing to let those resources define your worth. You can honor the past without being imprisoned by it. Alex Eala reminded us of that. She reminded us that athletes are not products of a single decision or a single place. They are the sum of countless choices, sacrifices, failures, and victories, most of which happen far from the cameras and the headlines. She reminded us that the narrative we tell about someone's career matters because it shapes how they see themselves and how the world sees them. Was this just a rivalry between gratitude and truth? Or was it the beginning of a necessary reckoning in how we talk about young athletes and the systems that shape them? The story of Alex Eala and the second home narrative isn't over. It's still being written with every match she plays, every interview she gives, every choice she makes about how to own her legacy. But one thing is certain, she's no longer content to be a character in someone else's story. She's writing her own now. And whether you agree with how she's doing it or not, you have to respect the courage it takes to pick up the pen.